This is about working together to build a cooperative ecosystem for our region. Today we have our special guests from the Democracy at Work Institute. They're a national institute that supports worker cooperatives. And they were a part of building this framework of an ecosystem to understand how we can help cooperatives start and succeed. So they'll be describing that in greater detail later. But for our intentions today, we want to develop the next steps for building a cooperative ecosystem in San Diego County. And this workshop is actually building on a previous workshop that was at the California Center for Cooperative Development's co-op conference that was in late May of this year, where this ecosystem idea was introduced. And then from there, we created a working group to fill out this ecosystem assessment for San Diego to understand what we have and what we need in order to have this thriving ecosystem. And today's workshop is intended to work with you all to help us think about what we're going to do next. So we will go through this process of, well, so the outcome is that we would like for you to learn about our ecosystem's strengths and gaps, and then to share opportunities that can advance our ecosystem. So that's a glimpse into the activity that will happen later. And our process is that San Diego Food Systems Alliance will share their vision for advancing community wealth building and how that connects to cooperatives. And then the Democracy at Work Institute, and I will introduce the co-op ecosystem assessment and share our findings. And then we will have all of you engage in this process of thinking through of the needs that we have to strengthen this ecosystem. What people, opportunities, programs do you know of that can help us address those needs? So I'll have Zen and Vanessa introduce themselves.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first gathering, and it's been really lovely so far. So I'm Vanessa Brandsburg, and I'm the co-executive director at the Democracy at Work Institute. So like Mai mentioned, we're a national organization that has been around for a little bit over a decade, whose mission is to expand worker ownership with communities that have barriers to work. We work with low-wage workforces, immigrant workers, BIPOC workers, in different parts of the country, and we work always in partnership, and we're really there to build the field and expand worker ownership as a tool for wealth building and economic development. And I live in San Diego, so I'm here.
Hi everyone, my name is Zen Trenholm. I work with Vanessa at the Democracy at Work Institute, and I'm their Senior Director of Employee Ownership, Cities, and Policy. Very descriptive title. You don't need to know more than that, but I'm really excited to be in this conversation with you all because of our work in helping grow ecosystems all around the country. There's so many lessons learned about how communities have come together to figure out how they can meet their needs through cooperation, right? Mai talked about earlier today that we've always relied and required on cooperation to survive, right? So the conversation ahead of us is how do we use cooperation to thrive, to keep building what we need to build. What is that infrastructure, right? What are those relationships, right? Those policies, those resources that are needed to make it more possible for cooperatives and cooperation to get started, to grow, and to thrive, right? To kind of shift the dominant narratives about who's deserving of quality work, what's possible in terms of food access and food quality, and you know, who's deserving of thriving, healthy living communities. We're shifting those conversations every single day we're organizing. We're also shifting it in all the ways that we do building. And so I have the privilege of getting to work with so many organizers, places like Chicago, Durham, Miami, San Francisco, and now here in San Diego, to be part of this like broader community conversation about what is it going to take and what do we bring to this work individually and as organizations, helping build this infrastructure. So very excited to be here with y'all, learning with you, sharing the stuff that we have learned, and being part of the conversation together about what's that next step. What do we do now?
I'm just going to fill in for Sona, who needs to step out, but just to add this piece about how DAWI, that works on worker cooperatives, connects with the San Diego food system and this theme of cooperation today, which is that, so the San Diego Food Systems Alliance launched this Food Vision 2030 campaign. Were any of you a part of those community conversations? Yeah, like maybe like a quarter of you. Okay, so that process was in 2018, 2019, where they engaged many community members. I believe it was like over 6,000 community members, food producers, farmers, fishermen, food businesses, to come up with this food vision for San Diego County, right? And one of the salient outcomes of that was that people overwhelmingly said that they want to have cooperatives, cooperative ownership, community wealth building by local ownership of our entire food system. So the San Diego Food Systems Alliance created their local economy food lab that centers the training and resourcing of food producers and consumers to form cooperatives. And so that focus is how they ended up becoming connected with Democracy at Work Institute, so that we can think about holistically, how do we support all these cooperatives to succeed here? And there I am again, in a different version of this jumpsuit. And so a part of the local economy food lab has also been providing these workshops on what is a worker cooperative, what is a producer cooperative, and address, oh, I am down there too. Okay, so these have been opportunities for people to learn about the fundamentals, and there's also resourcing to work one-on-one with businesses in their cooperative development. But going back to this conversation here today, is as much as we do that one-on-one resourcing with businesses, if you were here at the storytelling panel earlier, you'll have heard that in order for these co-ops to be successful, it's really our whole environment that needs to change. Kim said it really well, Kim of Suncoast Food Co-op in Imperial Beach, so that there's nothing wrong with the co-op model. It's everything else, right? And so that's why we want to engage you in your ideas, but also on an ongoing basis on how do we develop this ecosystem.
So just to want to get like a show of hands, just to know who's in the room, so you also know who's in the room and what knowledge and experience we'll be bringing to our conversation here. So raise your hand if you are part of a cooperative. You're an owner, you're a member, producer. Raise, okay, awesome, welcome. Okay, and what if are you like a lender? You provide loans to businesses or organizations. Any of those in the room? Any lenders? People are pointing at someone else. They don't want to raise their hand. That's cool. Okay. How about those organizations that provide business services, like business planning, feasibility studies, like help with procurement? Any of those folks? Welcome. Folks who organize in their communities, community organizers, community-based organizations. Awesome, welcome. Those who fund the work, that like fund nonprofits, resource the work, welcome. Any folks who are policymakers or are staff of city agencies or counties, awesome, welcome. We're about to talk about the ecosystem, and we're about to talk about the ecosystem maybe in a way we don't often talk about an ecosystem, right? Because my experience growing up was around, biological ecosystems, the land, the water, nutrient cycle, stuff like that, right? We're about to talk about business service ecosystems, and specifically how they serve cooperatives. We're gonna go into a whole framework about what that is, what that means to us. We boil it down to a set of different, what we like to say like assets, and and like relationships and roles in an ecosystem that either inhibit the ability for worker cooperatives to grow and thrive, or help them thrive, help them get started, to grow, to replicate, all of that. 2015, Democracy Work Institute and Project Equity, another national technical assistance provider around cooperatives, worked together to understand why are some places in this, around the world, how have they become such powerhouses in terms of developing worker cooperatives? Why is it that Emilia-Romagna has thousands, and Italy has thousands of worker co-ops, or in Quebec, for example? What's happening there that made it possible for these sectors to really grow and thrive and be a fundamental part of their economy? And so they wanted to understand that, like, what are some common denominators? And so they developed a cooperative growth ecosystem framework, looking at not only international examples, but also other parts of the country to really understand and assess, like, what does it take foundationally for an ecosystem to kind of grow up, to have those relationships, right? To have those roles that were played, where there's reciprocity and all of that. And then how does that ecosystem go from maybe a stage 1 to like the stage 2, stage 3, where now, as a worker, you work at a worker cooperative. As a shopper, you shop at a worker cooperative, right? Maybe as a producer, you're contributing to a cooperative. These are the layers of relationships, right? That in an ecosystem where cooperation is fundamental to how people get their needs met, that ecosystem had to start somewhere and had to go somewhere. And so we looked at that framework. Pressing the wrong thing. And we came up with 11 elements. Each one, and there's a whole report that we can share with you afterwards. We sent it around a sign-in sheet, so we're happy to send resources. What's most important to note here is that at the bottom here, we call essential elements, right? These are the foundational building blocks of a cooperative ecosystem. These are things like the skills and capacity and numbers of worker owners in an ecosystem who know how to tell the story of the impact of worker ownership on their lives, their families, their communities, their business, but also can train others on what it takes to do this work. It's skills, right? It's expertise. Those in this room who raise their hand saying they're part of cooperatives are definitely in this category. Then there's the financing and funding. We're just talking about resources. Just like in an ecosystem, you need nutrients, right? What are the resources we need to start businesses, to grow businesses, to support the training, to support the capacity building of organizations that work with those businesses? That's financing and funding. There are those who specialize in co-op development. Democracy and Work Institute, we're one of them. MI does co-op development. There are many, many others, but who know what it takes to really educate folks on democratic management and governance. Democracy is not something we experience every day in our lives at our workplace, right? It's kind of a difficult foreign thing, and there's education, culture building, training, all of that to equip people to do that work. And then technical assistance is like your lawyers, your accountants, the people who understand what a worker cooperative is and how to then navigate law and navigate the day-to-day business needs, and can work with you through that. So these are foundational. You need just the bare minimum to be able to say, okay, we have people here who know. If someone calls us and says, hey, how do I develop a worker cooperative? Are there folks in the ecosystem that can share that information, get resources to them, have the expertise to guide them through the process, right? That's foundational. Then we get into the accelerants, the important elements. These are all the things that help grow the sector to be bigger than just a few small businesses and a few small developers. That's your policy, right? That basically means governments saying we prioritize worker ownership because it allows us to achieve our goals in economic development, on reducing racial wealth gaps, and improving job quality, right, for excluded workers in low-wage industries, right? That use a tool of policy and therefore public funding to prioritize the investment in that sector, in training, in capital investments, stuff like that. Those who advocate with us, right? We're here in this conversation talking about the food system. We're also talking about worker cooperatives, right? And how that's a tool for advancing the goals of a cooperative food system. That's an advocacy partner there. And there are others, right? Working in labor, working in racial justice, right? Immigrant justice, gender justice, right? There are those who understand that in order to accomplish what we need to accomplish in the economy, we need a different kind of set of tools that ground in different kinds of values to create what we need to create. And that's your advocacy partners. Then the business supports and connections to market, which effectively means like your chambers of commerce, that can help with like if you're in the food industry, like or food manufacturing industry, can you rely on those sectors to be able to get additional expertise that are familiar with cooperatives, or build big supply chains that are partnered between a producer cooperative, a consumer cooperative, and a worker cooperative, right? That's kind of what we're talking about there. Connection to market is just like, can you get a big contract to like sell your food at a hospital, right? Or you sell your food, contract with the city, provide like school lunches that are cooperatively made and all of that. And then we get to environmental. And that's kind of maybe a little bit more like atmospheric or abstract, but it's actually fundamental to how we think about narratives, right? Environmental are just like, when you walk down the street, do you see a cooperative? When you go shopping, do you shop at a co-op? When you talk to your friends or family, do they work at worker cooperatives or other forms of cooperatives? It's seeing it, so you know that it's not just a pie-in-the-sky idea, but fundamentally just something that like is normal. People do it. Takes a certain set of skills and resources and so on, but it's not foreign. It's something that is possible, and it's your proof of concept. You see more of these businesses, it just makes it more possible. Same with attitudes and culture. If we're in a place talking about the need to do something different in our economy, that the same old way we invest in economic development or workforce development or community development isn't going to get us where we need to go in society. Then we're starting to shift our attitude about the approach. We're starting to think differently about who deserves to own their business, who deserves to have a high-quality job, right? And then you have cooperative education, right? Those are the academic institutions in this room, but also beyond that, those working in community to do community education. We're talking about worker ownership and other forms of cooperation, and why it's important, what we need to do about it, who are telling stories about cooperative history and impact on various communities, and be able to share that with folks so that more people are equipped with what they need to know to then take action, to then go and say, well, you know what? I do want to figure out how I want to develop my own co-op and build connections within a supply chain. So this all gets built out by having more worker cooperatives. And sometimes you have, if there's a shift in attitude and culture, that can actually move policy. That can move action and investment in new ways to support cooperatives. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like maybe here in San Diego, and then I'll share an example of New York City a little bit later on to see how that got informed and shaped over time. In Quebec, for 100 years now, the government there has been investing in a province-based strategy for building Quebecois-owned worker-owned businesses. They felt like they were maybe threatened by American companies coming in and like setting up shop and benefiting from the economic growth of the region. They want to develop an economy that is owned by those who live in that part of Canada, right? It's tied to a lot of cultural identity for sure, but this was such a big push that I forget exactly what year, but I thought maybe in the 1920s or something. I don't know. There was an investment in this financial institution called Desjardins, and the Parliament actually set up the funding to support the creation of a financial institution that can invest in the creation of worker-owned businesses. This was 100 plus years ago. Just kind of give you a sense of like the understanding of the attitudes and cultures and the priorities of that type of investment to go, we need something different, and we need to think about what it takes to actually resource that work. We developed a scorecard, right? Because numbers are helpful to be like, where are we at? We have a whole framework that we use that describe, well, what does 0 mean? What does 1 mean? What does 2 mean? Based on the research that was done all around the world to just know like, oh, what are we looking at here? So we can just have a conversation about where we are and where we want to grow. And so they're ranked from 0 to 5, different sizes, whatever. But that's kind of how we do it. And now I want to pass to actually talk a little bit about the assessment that was done here in San Diego and what it tells us about the needs and the opportunities moving forward.
Thanks, Zen. Actually, I'm actually wondering, since we're a little ahead of schedule, by a few minutes, but worthwhile for us to, I think, linger on this subject, kind of building on this question earlier about kind of what examples exist. Because I think it would be helpful for people to hear a US example of a more recent city that has invested in the co-op ecosystem to just help people be a little bit more prepared for the assessment. Yeah, I know you're going to talk about New York City, and I think it'll be good to have it on both sides. Maybe Madison as an example, as a smaller city, and then I'll go into the assessment just so that people are a little bit more grounded in like what it's taken to develop an ecosystem.
I'll talk about the Bay Area. So San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, they're all kind of in the same boat in terms of where they're at, relatively speaking, in terms of ecosystem. The Bay Area has an abundance of worker-owned businesses. So they have actually a lot of worker-owned businesses here. And they're kind of a general, like, this is before the huge tech boom, but like a counterculture, way of thinking about the economy. A lot of cooperatives were built in the 60s and 70s because people wanted to kind of exit the economy and do things with their own values. A lot of grocery cooperatives got started this way. They were saying, well, wait a minute, the mainstream economy doesn't allow us to live our values. And the Bay Area was an incredible place to say that and do that and have the support to do that. So there's just a lot of emphasis on that. There's also an emphasis on innovation and trying new things, right? Part of that is actually help create Silicon Valley and everything that's happened after that, right? But it's part of nonetheless a conversation about how do we do things differently, and that is celebrated and supported. So there's strong kind of environmental levels here. Some co-op education, at community colleges in the area. A lot of familiarity with the history of co-op development there, but still maybe a little bit. What you also have, and because of all that attitude culture and the formation of those co-ops back in the day, there's actually a ton of old and what's the word I'm looking for? Just like incredible worker-owned businesses that really show day in, day out what's possible. Like Ayers Mendy Cooperatives and the Cheese Board Bakery. These are institutions that have been around for 50, 40 years that show you how to do like baking and do it in a way that where the workers are making twice what they would at any other bakery. Or Rainbow Grocery, 150 worker owners that is a grocery store, worker owned in San Francisco, continues to produce really high quality jobs. They make enough that they help also seed the investment for continuous co-op education in the Bay Area. They provide a lot of small grants to help people go to conferences like this, for example. So there's a lot of that. And because there are worker-owned businesses and that are successful and that are charismatic, you also have folks that know how to invest in that work. You have lawyers that know how to do that type of technical assistance, right? Sustainable Economies Law Center is there. There's a lot of co-op development organizations that understand how to do this work, that do it maybe with different communities too. It's not even one developer that works with everyone. No, they're developers who work with Latinx entrepreneurs to help develop, like Promotora co-ops, for example, Paleta co-ops, other food-based businesses and so on. So there's a differentiation and a diversity of those who have expertise working with certain communities. What's missing, and what's a growth area, is the fact that there's very little policy and connection to market. There's a sense of we built it, it's sustainable, it's good enough. We were able to build it on our own without government support, because back in the day, government could care less about what we were doing. We'll make it ourselves. That's changing, because they know that the Bay Area is getting more and more expensive. They know that they're going to need additional investment to continue to be successful. And they know that in order to really move the needle in equity for the Bay Area, because we know how expensive it is, how difficult it is for people to stay in those communities. This is a conversation we're having in San Diego too, of course, right? They need to align with government, and they need to get government funding to help grow some of this work. If the government is putting out any contracts at all that go to business, they should be going to worker-owned businesses. So there's ongoing advocacy done by an association of worker-owned businesses called the Network of Bay Area Worker Co-ops. There's enough worker-owned businesses, over 55 in the Bay Area, that they form their own membership association to now advocate for policy at the city level. So you would say that these are maybe the weaker elements. Not enough contracting with big institutions to help grow individual co-ops. Not enough policy to help incentivize the growth of even more co-ops and even bigger co-ops. But you have a good foundation, a good environment to build from. So it's just a matter of them organizing and advocating for their needs. So just kind of give you a sense of where they're at. That helpful? Okay.
Thanks so much, Zen, for elaborating on that, because I think that helps paint a better picture of the ecosystem as the home that's needed for co-ops, right? Earlier we heard that ecosystems conjure up ideas of relationships. But beyond the relationships that we have with each other, it needs to be institutionalized and all around us. Eco means home. The ecosystem is the home for all of these interactions. And so for San Diego County, when we were doing our assessment, thank you, Zen, of what we have here, looks like, so Zen has mapped the scores onto these different areas. So actually, do you mind going back to the scoring image? So yeah, so the 0 is that there's a dotted outline, fill in the blank area, and then the growing size, right, to represent the scores. All right, and then if you could go back to San Diego then. Ooh. Faded from a bunch of big solids to this. And so this is probably no surprise to many of you, especially those of you who've tried to develop cooperatives here, that we have a lot of areas for growth. And I'm not sure how these sizes map quantitatively onto those other scores, but essentially the average score was around 1. And in working with a group of people who are members of cooperatives in San Diego, small business owners trying to start cooperatives, businesses trying to convert into worker cooperatives, people who are trying to start housing cooperatives, and then some people who are consultants with small businesses, some folks who work at the city. Together, we made this assessment of San Diego County's ecosystem and came up with these scores. So what we're going to do next is I'll go through the areas that we identified as needs in order to bump up our score just 1 or 2 points. And while I go through those needs, I'm going to elaborate on them a bit so that you have a clear understanding of what those challenge areas are, so that when we get into our activity, you can connect your relationships, ideas, knowledge about other happenings in San Diego to the needs that we've identified.
We don't operate from a scarcity mindset when we think about things like this. We're realistic about what exists and what doesn't exist so we can understand what's needed. But there are always assets. We're always starting, we're always building from what, we're in this, all of you are in this room right now. Like, that's an asset, right? That's a conversation that we're gonna have. Even if that might be a dotted line, there's still values-driven businesses, just maybe too few, right? Just because there may be an average score of 1, there actually are some strong business supports. San Diego happens to be in the state of California, which is really accelerating its support for cooperative development all around the state. It has policies. Many of the states have a lot less than California does in terms of its understanding and its statutes and its programs for employee ownership. So I just want to note that, like, this isn't a bad starting point. It's just the reality of, like, wow, like, what else can we now do? In many ways, there's so many opportunities to build on what we have here. And that's exciting, right? We're not bogged down with other things that are, maybe already exist and have a momentum to them. We can get a bit more creative. What's the need that's going to really excite us and we're going to be able to form kind of a common coalition around to address? And that's really an exciting thing. So just to note that every single ecosystem in the world has started with maybe even less than what San Diego has, and it keeps building from there. And I'll share a little bit afterwards.
Thanks, Zen. Thanks for taking us out of our SAT mentality. It's not about the number, but it's about starting from where we are and building from there. So we are going to go over the needs based on the categories laid out earlier: the essentials, the important, the environmental. And so under our core needs for the essential elements, for member skills and capacity, we identified that there needs to be a community of practice for existing and emerging co-op managers, training and mentorship to gain management skills, and to explore funding for democratic management training. All of this to say is that we have these young cooperatives, but we need to have people stay in them and to develop the institutional memory to have people be able to know how to manage them, how to bring in more people, right? We need money. So expand local lender financing for new and growing cooperatives and provide cooperatives loan readiness training. So in particular, we want to make cooperatives a vehicle for closing the racial wealth gap. In order to do so, we need to help people who might not have taken out a loan before or have worked with a financial institution to be able to go through the application process, and maybe the application process to actually know how to work with people who have been left out of these systems, right? And to ensure that when they take out a loan, they can repay it and it doesn't increase this wealth gap by furthering debt, right? We also want to work with foundations to expand grant making to build local cooperative development capacity, so to pay for co-op developers and trainers, the technical assistance providers. And we also have considered starting a San Diego Cooperative Fund. I think another area here that will connect with policy is, in general, when there are financing opportunities, they may be for a nonprofit. And if it is for a for-profit business entity, like the lenders may not know what a cooperative is. Be like, are you a nonprofit, or can we actually fund you? So clarifying that with our lending institutions, and also just making more funding accessible to cooperatives, and not treating them as a conventional for-profit business. Another area is we need to have more co-op developers. I'm the only one for Southern California. So identify community-based organizations, work centers, and business incubators that might be interested in becoming co-op developers or supporting co-op development. Connect them to funding, training, and peers. And in the technical assistance, to educate and equip local professional technical assistance providers, those lawyers, bookkeepers, right, on worker ownership, and connect them with national experts and businesses in need of services. So in this realm in particular, we have many farmers who are looking for bookkeepers, and that's already a challenge for bookkeepers to know how to keep records for crop cycles, especially when the time that the crop is grown is a different year from when it's sold. I experienced that as a grain farmer, for example. And layer on top of that, needing them to have this knowledge of how do you keep books for a cooperative where there are different owner members who have different shares, they make different contributions to the cooperative. How do you pay them out equitably, right? So that layer of knowledge is what's missing in San Diego right now. But of course we have CPAs, we have bookkeepers around. So how do we train people who are already in that realm of expertise in the realm of cooperatives? So going back to what Zen was saying about how we're not starting from nothing, we just need to fill in a bit more.
Important elements, the accelerators, the things we need to grow. I'll just do a brief overview of this. I think actually the foundational, walking through that and in detail is very, very important. In our breakout conversations, we have all of this, so we can spend a little bit of time together talking about it and maybe ask them some questions. But I'll just highlight a few. Business supports. There are organizations that provide business services, and we should, instead of having to do everything ourselves, we should work with them because they know how to provide that. They just might not know about what a worker cooperative is. We're at a Food System Alliance. We are talking about connections between producers and retail businesses and manufacturers and communities and so on. There are so many opportunities to figure out how might a worker cooperative be one way in which we produce quality jobs and that source from these farms and these manufacturers that can align values, right, across the supply chain. So we need to think about ways to do that. How to get access to contracts so we can grow these businesses too. Policy, I'll just read it, but like advocate for funding, investment in not just the business themselves, but the capacity that's needed to do that education of those lawyers, do that education of community-based organizations, right? That want to learn co-op development. What is it going to take? So it's that kind of investment. Sometimes it's red tape. Sometimes it's difficult, right, for worker co-ops to access existing programs. We got to look at that too. And then finally, you know, I remember someone told me that like we don't live single issue lives, and so our causes shouldn't be single issue too. And I think when you think about advocacy, it's like building partnerships with other groups. We're also trying to move the needle in equity, and would align with us and say, you know what, I come in from a job standpoint, right? Or I do gender justice work. We need to figure out how do we work together to advance a common agenda. Sometimes it means showing up at their table and figuring out how we lend a support to their advocacy work. Sometimes it's forming coalition together. There are many examples of what this looks like all around the country, but it's building those partnerships. Vanessa, you want to speak to this, or do you want me to? Okay.
So in terms of the environmental elements, you know, I think what we'd like you to do is start thinking about what are the actual cooperatives that we have currently in San Diego, any other socially focused businesses, like who could we be sort of pointing to and highlighting and learning from? But then also, I think also, you know, using data that the field has collected about how worker ownership impacts workers. DOWI and the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops and other organizations can offer a lot of that to start building a narrative, right, that we can utilize here in San Diego to make the case to our government officials, to funders, to the community members, to start really valuing worker ownership. And then we can also think about, you know, either educational institutions or other kind of settings where we could talk about worker ownership and how people can connect to that.
I'll do this real briefly, but to give you a sense of another city. I mentioned New York City in the beginning, and why I mentioned that is that it's now the largest cooperative ecosystem in the country. And that was not an accident. It took actual organizing, a major investment that created the resources to build that capacity. So I keep pressing the wrong way. Okay, New York City, you've seen the different size squares. I don't think get too much in detail, but we needed more co-ops, more money, we needed more policy and more contracts. A group of organizations got together in 2014, this is pre-2014, to say, you know what, the city has a focus on addressing poverty. They should be, as part of that focus, funding worker cooperative development. One organization knew how to get those dollars. The worker co-op community didn't. We didn't have those advocacy partnerships before. We didn't have the policy chops before. But with that advocacy partner, we were able to understand what it took to work with our partners in the city to unlock those dollars. And in the last 10 years, there are now over, 93, 95 worker-owned businesses, almost 100. Before this got started, there's maybe around 20. We just celebrated 10 years of investment. That has helped invest in more worker-owned businesses and a lot more skilled and experienced co-op people who work at worker cooperatives. They're now training other people on worker ownership, and they're also doing advocacy work themselves. It's not just a bunch of nonprofit developers. It's also them advocating for their needs too. There's way more dollars in that ecosystem to finance and resource this work. Far more co-op developers working for many more different kinds of communities. And because of all of that, you now see an increase in attitude and culture where worker ownership isn't some foreign thing. Even in a city as big as New York, there's a shift in cultural understanding of worker ownership. It's not just something exotic. It's something that's just, they see it and they feel it. They shop there, they work there, so on. There's a lot more educational programs from intro classes to graduate programs on worker ownership. It's just done a lot and it's allowed the ecosystem from a policy standpoint to even launch even larger initiatives. So there's been funding of education and training, but there's also been a strategy, because of that work, the city invested in supporting retiring owners who are trying to figure out who to sell to because they want to leave the company, to figure out how they can sell to their employees. Keep the jobs there, the services there, the business there, they retire, but now you have a whole new generation of the workers, predominantly workers of color, who are now business owners and entrepreneurs. And this, because of that initial investment, that built the attitudes and culture, the fundamental foundation of technical assistance, co-op developer skills. to be able to allow for that next big strategy, which is now even growing the ecosystem even more. So ecosystems evolve over time. Some things start, some things kind of wane, but you're always trying to build the foundation. And that's what the Worker Co-op Business Development Initiative for the last 10 years has been doing, and could provide an example, right, for what investment and sustained investment could look like for places like San Diego. We went through a lot. We showed you a framework. We looked at San Diego's ecosystem. We talked about what the needs are. There's a lot of content there. What we want to do now is actually get into breakout conversations so we can really talk together about those needs. There's a lot of potential opportunity and probably a lot of good ideas in this room, and we want to be able to source that together. And that will inform what the San Diego Food System Alliance and and others like Dawi then will think about in terms of what comes next. Like, what's that strategy moving forward that's very clear, where there seems to be alignment and a desire to actually work together on things. This isn't just a passive exercise. We hope that when you're contributing to this work, you're also saying, I want to support this, and here's how. Right? Some of us can support it in ways like, I'll just tell someone about this, or I want to be informed. Others might come from organizations, institutions that do want to be part of this work. We want to know who you are, what you want to do, all of that. So this is an opportunity to really get your hands in and to explore what's possible here. So we're breaking down into 3 different groups, all around our elemental categories. So Mai is going to have a conversation about cooperative development and training, some of those needs we were talking about specifically to how do we make sure we have more organizations that know how to incubate worker-owned businesses. So who could be, this is just a suggestion of who can be in that conversation. You go anywhere you want. This is a democracy, but some ideas, right? For things, if you're interested in this work, you might have a role in supporting some of it. You might be a community-based organization. I saw a bunch of organizers here. Might be interested in learning new skills in this area. That might be a good conversation to be a part of, right? I'll have a conversation about resourcing the ecosystem, talking about capital, both philanthropic and public dollars, how we think creatively about policy. And so that's a conversation with maybe funders and policymakers, city folks. We just talk about, what questions are coming up for us? What would be some ideas for addressing some of the resource gap that's needed here? And then Vanessa's going to have a conversation about building co-op culture, right? That's education, that's new narratives. Right, that's storytelling to show people that this is possible. It exists already here and can be grown, and maybe it's focused. Right, it's not just like little work group conversations here and there, but actually it's a little bit more concerted to introducing new people to this idea, who then can support all the other pieces of the work. That's kind of the intention there. So that's how we're going to break out, and again, it's an opportunity to talk about needs and go through some of these questions. Ooh. Okay. Discuss it, understand each need. Do you know of any resources, opportunities, relationships that can help address any of them, right? Is there a next step? What's something we want to do? What's that first next step? Maybe it's more conversation. Maybe it's a meeting that is coming up that we should attend. What's that next step? And then how do you want to contribute to it, right? That's that call to action piece. And bonus points, I mentioned New York City, the Worker Co-op Business Development Initiative. That did a lot. That's not the only way to grow an ecosystem. You can do it through business relationships and business partnerships, and there's a lot there. But, the question always is like, because I like to simplify things, is like, what is a project idea that can help meet several needs at one time? Maybe it's a particular campaign on an issue area. Maybe there's a big opportunity coming down the line around food system work that you think there's a big business development angle here. Let's focus on what's needed to maybe use some of those resources to tell some stories and build some capacity, ultimately create more worker-owned businesses in the food sector. I don't know. You may know that, and you may have a good idea for what that one core project should be. Now's the time to share it.
So we are going to start wrapping up the session. We went over a little bit, so I think what we can do is maybe just hear like a couple minute next steps from each group. You don't have to go into all the details, just some actionable items that you all shared in your group. And then we'll wrap up and head out to the end of the gathering outside, okay? So who would you all be willing to kind of go first? Does that feel? Yeah, Central makes sense.
The short of it is that in order to have the essential components of member skills capacity, financing, co-op developers, and technical assistance, is that we need to train and educate people within government to understand the benefits of cooperatives, and we will do so by having really fun events, dangling the savior complex in front of them to say, you can be the champion of solving our housing and labor crises. Having co-ops, finding funding so that the co-ops that do exist, food and worker, so they're a part of putting on that event so that our representatives and their staffers see the beauty of the co-ops that exist and encourage them to support more of them.
Thank you. For the important elements, I'll just say one thing and actually want to pass the mic to one other person, talk about something else. Talk about the Healthy Food Financing Initiative. Not only does it help finance the development of new grocery cooperatives, but also there's something called the Fair Fund that also is also another pool of dollars that's just it's fairly new that can fund even more capacity building. I think one of our members was able to receive a sizable grant a couple years ago to help do a market study to understand the potential of growing the business. There are dollars that are coming from the federal government that go down to states, that go down to a local administrator that then works with applications. And so we talked about, and we have some connections here, some ways to facilitate that. Socialize that, spread the message on that pool of money, and then provide a little education, some connections to figure out how to access those dollars to help finance some of the food work that we've been talking about. And then there's one other big opportunity that's timely, that's policy related, that is involving a strategic plan.
Thanks for putting me on the spot. Hi, everyone. My name's Stephanie. You might have heard me in the first storytelling session this morning. I work for the County of San Diego, and we received a grant, a SALC grant that we are partnering with LAFCO on. It's called SALC 2.0. You can probably put it in Google and find our website, but we're wrapping up a market and gap analysis currently to understand how to make farms more economically sustainable in San Diego, either through regenerative sustainable agricultural practices, increasing marketing, however we can remove barriers to help farms be more economically sustainable. So we plan to release that market and gap analysis by the end of this year, and then we'll be rolling into a strategic planning phase where, based on what we found, we want to help brainstorm solutions. We want everybody involved, producers, experts, anybody who has any ideas. I'm super interested in co-ops and finding a way to get local governments to support the establishment of co-ops. I've heard so many barriers about farmers markets and other types of ways to get producers to buy your produce that are just not profitable. So anyway, thanks for allowing me to say something about that. Please get involved. We really want to hear your ideas.
Thank you. And you provided an email address, which we can also share around to those who signed in the attendance sheet. That's how you get access to stuff. And then who wants to report back? All right.
Okay. All right, so for our group, the environmental elements, we think that there's real opportunity by bringing together some of the small businesses that are chefs, that are bakeries, to be able to do some sort of sharing around what they're learning and the values that they hold that are based on cooperation, and that there's real opportunities of looking at like local places, like hyper-local kind of potential projects, and maybe even approaching community foundations that might be interested in using space to maybe have like some land trust projects to really look at sort of like multiple uses of space that include worker ownership. And I wonder if Sam, if you would like to add.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. And I think the overall takeaway for the group is that we just want more and more members of our community to know about this model, because a lot of us are just grinding in our work and we're doing our best, but there's still so many people who just doesn't know like the benefit of this. And so we definitely want some sort of education media campaign to tell those stories, to humanize the people that are in this ecosystem already, so that people don't think it's just some crazy idea out there, but that these are people in our community that are actually achieving some sort of success and resilience, and they're able to build wealth over time and provide for the community and not be vulnerable to all these, forces of gentrification and so we definitely want to see more of that, and to be able to be innovative and get the people that have been thinking about equity and justice in our region to really take a big bet on this, right? To come together as funders, to come together as policymakers, to actually invest in this space, and to be able to demonstrate how this can happen in communities where we already have elements of these. So I think that's a great takeaway, and I'm really appreciative of all the things that have been said here. I don't know if anyone else wants to add.
Thank you so much, everyone, for really thoughtfully engaging and digging into this topic, because I am now going to synthesize it into what will be used for the San Diego Ecosystem Assessment Working Group to turn into a strategic plan. Our next meeting is going to be November 21st. So if you'd like to be a part of this working group, you're welcome to come to that meeting. You can contact me about that. If you would just like to be updated about the strategic plan and see what we come up with and ways for you to plug in, you're also welcome to contact me. But what's easiest is if you sign into that sheet that Zen has passed around, and we will keep you updated. So again, thanks again, very heartfelt thanks for contributing to this ecosystem, and I look forward to reporting back a year from now and see what our score is then. All right, I'll see you outside at the social.